Welcome to the Black on Shelf podcast, a podcast championing Black and brown entrepreneurs on the digital and physical shelves. I'm your host, Tanaj Ferguson. This is Black on Shelf.
All right, Boss Fam, we have here Jayne Allen, who is a phenomenal author. You'll hear more about her background, but just want to put it out there. Her pen name is Jayne Allen, for those wondering, and her actual name, her government name is Janique Seeley. We'll be calling her Jayne. It's not a secret, but we'll be calling her Jayne throughout the episode so that you're aware and you match the name with the author's name on the book. So welcome to the Black on Shelf podcast, Jayne. You were recently on Good Morning America. We're super happy to have you here talking about your experience as a Black author, a woman in business, an attorney, Black girl magic personified, essentially. So there's a lot of conversations we want to have around business, around being an author, around being a phenomenal woman. But let's start with who you are. Tell us more about your background.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. My background, it started pretty conventionally. I went to, although I had a couple of changes along the way. I started out thinking I was going to become a doctor. I went to engineering school, thinking that I'd be biomedical engineering, and then I'd go into med school. And, that changed very quickly. I think it does for a lot of people. Once they get into it, it's like, I kind of hate this. And so that was how I felt. And so I made some changes pretty quickly. And decided that law school would be better for me and would give me more flexibility and options. So I went to law school, almost wound up on a conventional law firm path, but thankfully had this intervening moment while I was still in law school. It's sort of kind of a fate thing.
I have to stop you, Jayne, because Jayne is talking about her conventional path. However, Jayne went to Duke for undergrad for engineering and then Harvard Law School. So we have to give her flowers and receipts because it is not a conventional path. That's amazing.
Well, thank you. Okay. Well, I will accept that. Thank you. So I guess I think conventional in terms of established pathways. And
yes. I know what you meant there, but I had to give you your flowers too for there's a version of this that people will be like, that's not conventional. She's different. Okay. She is different.
Okay. Well, so yes, I was following an established pathway.
Yes.
And what happened after my first year of law school, this was unusual. I had a permanent offer. So I was extended a permanent offer for employment for post-graduation. So that meant I had 2 years of law school to go but I would know from there what the rest of my life looked like. Mm-hmm. And from a financial stability standpoint, that seemed great. I would, be an associate at a law firm for whatever, 7-8 years. My life would pass me by. I would be working around the clock. And then I would become a partner and make a lot of money. And I'd still be working around the clock and I wouldn't have time to spend all the money I was making. And I thought, you know what, that's not what I want my life to look like. Also, I don't want to have a path that I already know how it kind of winds up.
Yeah.
So knowing that wasn't going to feel fulfilling for me, I gave myself permission to daydream. I remember literally sitting on my sofa, and this was just past 9/11 that happened. And I think that was that moment where you start to think, okay, this thing is meaningful. This life thing is real. Like it's finite, it's fragile. Mm-hmm. And what am I doing with my time? And how am I going to make this as meaningful as it can be? Mm-hmm. So I gave myself that moment and I sat and thought, well, if the established path, the conventional path, is not going to be fulfilling and make me happy, what would, if I just imagine, what would make me happy? And so I sat and I thought, wow, I think I want to be in the music industry. I don't want to be in New York or LA. I want to be at the small record label. I want to be surrounded by music and musicians and have a recording studio and all of these experiences. And so I dreamed this up and I was like, wow, that would be really nice, but sounds impossible. So I let it go.
Okay.
A few weeks later, I wound up at a talk. So they had brought in a bunch of entertainment people to do a panel at my school. And I was sitting in the audience, and then I hear this guy say, yeah, I've got this record label kind of startup it's well funded. We're in DC. We're building out a recording studio and I was like, whoa, wait a minute. This sounds a lot like what I was dreaming up. And and so I was like, okay, well, this isn't like me normally, but I'm going to go up and talk to him after this panel and see if he would, this is too uncanny. So I go out to him and I ask him, hey, would you ever hire somebody right out of law school? Because people had just told me over and over, there's no way you can get a job straight into entertainment in-house right out of law school. You have to go to a firm for a couple of years at minimum. And so, I was like, is there any way? And he was like, absolutely not. I wouldn't hire somebody out of law school. And so I was like, well, and I was trying to get past no here, and I was thinking my feet, and I was like, well, this is still too uncanny to just let it go. I was like, well, what about if I work for free? And so he was like, well, okay, let's stay in touch. So I wound up interning the rest of my second year, spent half of my summer between my second and third year at interning here, and wound up getting a permanent offer from them, going into my third year, and wound up working there, commuting back and forth. So I say that to say that was this first kind of foray into thinking entrepreneurially about my career. And and realizing, wow, you can kind of craft a vision for your life and make it come true. You have to take some risks.
I love this part. And I definitely want us to spend some time here because I see a couple things that happen. One was you really allowed yourself to have that vision on what do I really want to do? If it's not this path, what's this other path? And if it were perfect, what could it look like? The second thing was not accepting that first no and instead figuring out like, what's some other ways for me to still get this to happen? So for the Boss Fam, talk to us about some things that others can do when it comes to like really coming against those initial things that make them not do the thing they need to do. In your case, it was like letting yourself dream, not accepting the no. That looks similar for people, but in a different situation, right? What are some tips you could give them around coming against those things that hold them back?
Well, I think that first you have to separate yourself from what people tell you is possible versus not possible. And you just have to start from a place of knowing or being willing to accept that anything is possible. You have to be willing to accept that anything is possible. Even if you don't believe it, you have to be willing to accept that there's a possibility that anything is possible. And I think that's an important thing because a lot of times when people give you their advice or they give you their opinion, they give it to you from the perspective of their limitations. And also they're doing their best, and they're trying to protect you from what has been challenging for them. But challenges aren't necessarily, they're painful, but they aren't necessarily harmful.
Right.
So you have to keep that in mind and take what people say as a grain of salt. People giving you advice are, people that told me you can't do this, you can't go into the music business straight out of law school. They're telling me on the basis of what they experience, and they're trying to save me what they believe to be pain. But they're also trying to keep me from my dreams. You have to realize that it's two things. And sometimes the way to accomplish your dreams, the path to doing it is a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, not a little. It's uncomfortable. Yeah. It's uncomfortable. But what you want is on the other side of that discomfort. And so just for me, thankfully, I was fortunate that I had the vision, what I had kind of come up with in my imagination as this ideal scenario. And here it is being presented to me almost verbatim. So I at least had that to hold on to. And I had to connect to pull me through that discomfort because I was uncomfortable about approaching this person.
You said that wasn't your personality.
No, that's not my
like
style.
You were like, oh yeah, I'll just go network with him. This was not your style. Right?
That's not my style.
And it doesn't have to be. That's where the vision came in. You're like, no, I have to take this moment. This may not happen again.
Yeah, it's too uncanny. So I would say that, that no is the beginning of a road. That's the other thing I would say. No is the gateway to a journey. I think a lot of times we're conditioned to think, oh, somebody said no, that must be the end. not in entrepreneurship, and not in, not in crafting the life that you really, that's yours, and setting your own path. That's the beginning. That's the door opening to that road. And no is a journey. And it's an iterative journey. You get a no, and then you hopefully get a why, or you just, try a different approach and try again and see what you get, whether it's a yes or a no. And you just keep going until that no transforms. And it will. Yeah. It will. So, those are the things that I would probably, I have a whole bunch to say about it.
Those are some good ones.
but I would start there.
Love it. So you end up actually interning, you get the full-time job. What happens next?
So I worked there for a year, and then as a startup, and ran out of money. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So I decided, coin toss, New York, LA. I went to LA. Okay. And then wound up, I took the bar. I worked for a few other startups in a marketing capacity, which who knew that I would need that later in life. But I just kind of
nothing is wasted, right? Nothing is ever wasted.
Nothing is wasted. It may seem random, but it's definitely not wasted. And wound up in an entertainment practice. Fast forward at Universal Music, a big, large record company, and a digital strategy executive role. That was my dream job. I was there for 4 years. I'm still great friends with basically everybody that I worked with. But it just came to a point where I realized that I wanted to be closer to the creativity and to the product. At that time it was artists and closer to the conversation with the audience and the community that was being built. So
I hear the marketer in you. You want to be closer to the conversations, closer to the point, right? But one thing I don't know from your story is, so you took the law school route, but you're so interested in music. Where did that part come from? Like, you had this desire to do entertainment, to be a part of this music industry. Were you ever a part of that, or just an enthusiast like a lot of us?
I grew up very close to the music industry. My mom was an entertainment lawyer. Also, she worked in entertainment, and we had musicians around our house. I just grew up in the midst of music all the time. And at one point I wanted to be a musician.
I was going to say, can you belt a tune?
Can
you play an instrument?
Evidently, no. I was told I could not. So, but it just was in my veins, and and it was just such a passion for me. So I wanted to be around it. It was, a creative energy that I was just so familiar with. And it just stayed with me. So that was, when I started to think, okay, what do I really want to do? Where do I want to be? What do I want to help create? That was always the thought. So
what's your favorite type of music? Just curious.
I love R&B. I think I'll always be an R&B head, old school and some of the new school stuff. I feel like once you get to the age, now I'm 43. So like once you get to the age where you're like, who, when there's somebody's on the radio, like, So I'm like, oh no, I'm of that generation now. So, so I'll just say old school, because probably what is old school is like what I grew up with now. So it is what it is.
Love it.
But so that journey, I wound up getting deeper into marketing, digital strategy, audience development, worked with Lady Gaga on that team. It was a Born This Way album. And it was an incredible experience. And it taught me the power of community. That was really a community building, an audience building exercise. And I took that with me, and ultimately wound up focusing on building audiences and creating audiences for brands. So I did brand development, brand strategy, and audience development strategy. So I very much focused on how do you build community? How do you create an audience for whether it's a person or a brand or a product? That has very much been my career focus from this point. And it's, I've done it for products. I've done it for companies, startups. I've done it for people. I've done it for books. So I just kind of repeat this same process that I really love the study of this. And I love seeing it the strategy come together in different ways for different applications. So that is, the long and short of how we got up to the point of me becoming an author.
Yeah. So you go through this professional experience, and I'm sure as a part of that and being in this type of industry, you're having a lot of encounters and experiences that shape you. So what is the trigger that really made you say, I need to put this in a book?
I think getting to the end of my 30s,
I
was thinking, wow, there is so much that I know today that I do not, the cusp of 40, you think, okay, wow, a whole decade just passed. There's so much that I wish somebody had told me, when I was in the cusp of turning 30, that would have really changed this decade for me. And I would have enjoyed it more, I think. So, and I think the 30s was about the tension between fulfillment and the supposed tos, and
I'm 31, so I'm resonating.
Okay.
It's resonating with me.
Yes, it's the tension between, fulfillment and the supposed tos. And it feels like, everything is so critical, every decision is so critical, everything you do is so critical and meaningful. And then you get to 40 and you're like, none of that matters. So but it's, so I wanted, and also I decided, I went through a fertility reproductive health journey. And I also wound up freezing my eggs very late in my 30s, which I should have done, and which I had done earlier but I didn't have the information. I didn't have the resources. So I thought, okay, there's really something I think I could offer, and how fun to do it in a story form, and center a Black woman in a story that in spaces and in ways that we don't really examine, and we don't really typically celebrate, and we don't really typically acknowledge as a society. So that was my thought. I want, to do something different, and that was going to be meaningful to me, and that I wish I had had. When I was in my early 30s.
To that point, like I mentioned, I'm 31, and so some of my friend group are experiencing the same thing. Thankfully, I think the part of society we're in today, we're talking about it a bit more, to the point that it actually scares you as a single woman, where you're like, wait, am I going to be okay?
Yeah.
Seems like, we've done such a good job at amplifying it. Now you're like, it could be possible for me too. Right.
Right.
Exactly. But I love that, because I think it should be a conversation. We shouldn't just assume, but also the other point of it is, you shouldn't think it's the end of your life, because now we know there's more options. And if you could ask on time, right? It took you to end of your 30s. I think this generation is asking pretty much in their 30s, some before, but it is something more people are thinking about. Just the other day, I saw a good friend from school posting her fertility pictures and, celebrating the 1-year anniversary her son was born, and just, reminding people that you only saw the pictures of him being here, but like, you don't know what went behind it. And, her just sharing that this is what went behind it, and why they're so happy. I love that, because we just need more of that authenticity, more of that transparency, to know that, oh, okay, this is someone who made it. There are stories that are not as positive, where, or it's not the ideal outcome that the person wanted, but they're sharing that, hey, it's still a hard time. And they don't have to share. These are private decisions, private experiences, but it is so great that there are spaces where people can be comfortable sharing it. And I love that you decided to put that in your book. What made you make it fiction?
Well, I thought that fiction, and so I have a dog, and so my dog is,
he's invited.
He has found his way into mischief. So I'm bribing him with a treat right now. So maybe he'll let us continue to talk.
He knows how to get his treats.
I'm like, oh goodness. So if he could just jump on the screen right now and be part of the conversation on camera, I think he would. He's such a personality. But so I decided to use fiction. So I wanted to do something different. I am a reality TV person. I admit it. It's a guilty pleasure. But I think the reason why we enjoy it so much is that it's showing us something about human behavior that we don't really get to see, just past the everyday. And I thought, well, what if we did that with fiction? What if I use fiction to push us past the everyday, still take you into life, but do this like life parallel thing that can kind of teach us we're about places that we're afraid to go, either,
Yeah.
within ourselves or with other people. And there were certain conversations that I thought were really important to have about race, about womanhood, about, this conversation, internal conversations about fulfillment, about being seen, especially as a Black woman, and this journey of authenticity. And a lot of times in fiction, especially contemporary fiction, which is like my go-to genre.
Yeah.
When I've seen Black characters in contemporary fiction, I felt like a lot of times, especially with non-Black authors, you would hear some descriptive thing like, oh, this character is Black. And that was supposed to be meaningful because what they're doing is leveraging the perceptions, projections, and sometimes bias of the reader. So like you say, oh, this character is Black. And whatever that person reading believes Blackness is, then that's what that's
associated.
That's all that happens. So you really didn't give anything as an author when you do that. It's akin to like describing a person as almost a setting or a prop. So I wanted to go and dive into the humanity where I don't say Tabby's Black. That's Tabitha Walker is the protagonist of Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. I say this is the experience that this person is living. This is the layers of womanhood, the layers of Blackness from a societal perspective. And this is what happens to her on a day-to-day basis. So you don't have to say necessarily that she's Black. You say this is what happened to her. And it is largely a unique experience to someone who is living the experience of Blackness, or woman, or the combination of both. So that was the challenge of what I wanted to do with this story, and then also bring her into conflict, relationship, conversation with other characters who were also being pushed past their limits and to see what happened. So oftentimes when I was writing scenes, I didn't know how it was going to go ahead of time. I just thought, okay, I'm going to put these, I've set these characters up, I've pushed them, and I'm going to set them into play with each other and see where this goes, because, they have no choice now but to get real, so that was how I decided to use fiction for this book.
I love that. I think one of the things I'm interested in is, what is some of the outcomes or conversations you'd like to stimulate as a result of this book? What would you like this book to do for the culture, for the community?
So one of the exciting things that happened, I've talked to a lot of book clubs with this book. And the one group, this was all white women actually. And one of the things that came up, one of the members of the book club is saying, well, I just started to think, how am I showing up authentically and not showing up authentically? And how can I show up more authentically in the spaces that I occupy? And I thought, wow, that's amazing that this woman, especially a Black woman, has this to teach everybody. Not just Black women, but she is that for Black women. She's an example of that and a teacher of that, but also that non-Black women can see their humanity reflected in this person and in this story. And I think that's so, so important because the way that society is structured, we're conditioned to believe that we're so different from each other, that, because your experience is different, because you look different, you can't relate, you can't connect. And that's not true. What pain feels like to me is what pain feels like to anybody else. It's what, it may be caused by different things, but it feels the same. The experience, the human effect is the same. So I wanted to challenge that narrative as well, that we can't connect to each other. We can't understand. There's some, non-Black characters in the book that Tabitha interacts with. And there's a lot of intimacy and transparency that happens in those spaces and conversations with those characters. So I hope that becomes reflected in real life as well, that maybe these characters, having pushed them, they were, thank them for their sacrifice. And, I threw a lot of fireballs at these characters to push them into the spaces they went to. So
love to see this as a drama on TV.
Exactly. So hopefully in real life, these characters can inspire, other deeper conversations, more transparent conversations between people. So those are some of the things that I hope. And also the larger question, which is going from being in the space of kind of survival mode and thinking from that place to starting to ask the question, what does fulfillment look like? What does thriving look like? And how can I move beyond, the weight of my day-to-day experience into something that feels more like a celebration?
Yeah, which to me kind of connects to that vision, some of your experience when you were in law school, right? You could have done survival mode, which would have been, let me just take this job I already have that's guaranteed to give me the money so I can get my return on this law school degree. But then there's this other mode of, what if there was a different way to thrive and it didn't look like resistance? It didn't look like the path already laid out for me by somebody else. What if I could actually step into my own destiny and really create this new vision for what I was going to do versus just following what I'm expected to? So you're definitely living and walking that from your own experience. We have to get at the title, right?
Yes.
Black girls must die exhausted. And, I know from other spaces, you've already said, clearly this is not correct, but this is a great hook. This is a great, So for the Boss Fam, you don't have to die exhausted. That's not what we're saying.
Right.
This is really a call to action to really rethink, must you die exhausted? And the answer is no. Talk to us more about this compelling title and really some of your experiences around why this is so compelling for a lot of people. Why does it?
Yes. I think it strikes a chord because the word exhausted is so frequently used to express the feeling of the multiple layers that we're experiencing, especially as Black women. That was the word I was feeling when I came up with the concept for this book. It was exhausted. It was exhausting. There's so many things, and reasons. And when I started this, I felt unacknowledged. I felt unprotected. I felt unseen, uncelebrated. And so I wanted to change that for myself and others. And the word that encapsulated all of that, feeling uncelebrated, unseen, all of those things, was exhausting. Yeah. And so I started there and I thought, okay, how do I contextualize this and how do I, have a title that tells its own story? So when it's Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, that's really a contextualization of a whole life lived, and how do you define the life that you're living? Yeah. And so in this story, Tabitha Walker's word at the beginning is exhausted. And then what I wanted to do was use the story to change the meaning of that title for myself and for the reader. Mm-hmm. So where we come into the story, we may be feeling this way, but the story begins as an acknowledgement saying, yes, I see you. And yes, this is happening. And yes, you are entitled to feel that way. And then it goes into a celebration of, and yet here is, what you accomplish and how you are able to show up and be a friend and a sister and a lover and a wife and a, partner and a spouse and a mother, all of these things with all of the weight, when you start to look at it, it's like, wow, I'm a super being, and so it goes into the celebration and then ultimately is intended to end on an inspirational note and saying, okay, now that we've gone to all of these places, what do you really want? Now that you know what you're really capable of and all the things that you're doing in spite of, and you realize, your hopefully your strength and your power and your beauty and all of that's hopefully have reclaimed it or some piece of it. Who do you want to be? What do you do with it now? Yeah. And so at the end of the book, the title has a completely different meaning or should have. And there is a different meaning that I intended to create through the story. So that's the journey of the title. And so no, it's not it's a book title and it's explained and there is meaning to it. But I know it has a visceral effect. And that, I guess it was so closely connected to my truth at the beginning of this and the change of that truth that I wanted to make I wanted it to become something beautiful from out of what I had been feeling.
So now that are you still doing any of the music law?
No. So I'm fully engaged in publishing. So so Black Girls Must Die Exhausted is the first of a trilogy. We have 2 more books coming out in that series. So Black Girls Must Be Magic is the second book.
Oh my goodness.
That comes out in February.
Wow.
Yeah. I think, do I have that? I do have it.
This is the arc of that. Oh my gosh.
It's
Jayne.
beautiful.
So beautiful.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing because you're taking these assumptions that we have in our community and society and really telling those stories there and evolving what they mean. I think so many people could resonate. We've all had these moments where we feel like we won't make it unless we're exhausted. And while the journey sometimes does take that, that's not supposed to be the long road, right?
No.
What were some of your most story or iconic experiences that really remind you that this book was important? So, because you had to experience this exhaustion, whether it's in music or in law school, you had these key moments where you yourself felt like, I'm not going to make it unless I'm tired. Then you had the change of mind and lifestyle, really, to show you maybe there's a way for me to both be brilliant and not broke down.
Yes.
Talk to us about those dynamics in your life.
Well, there's so many moments. I mean, when I left the music industry, I was really in my dream job. And again, the road was set out in front of me of how my career would go. And I've been there 4 years and I just had a moment where I literally just couldn't take anything anymore, which made no sense because everything was perfect. But I did not feel fulfilled. And there was more. It was like my spirit was calling me to do more. And I decided that I was going to, jump off of a perfectly good moving plane and go after my goals and go after my fulfillment. That was a moment where trusting my gut on that paid off. And it still was challenging, but I knew that it was possible and I knew that there was a good outcome from that. So I first learned to trust myself and how I was feeling, which I think we learn to ignore those things and we're conditioned to. But that was one of the first things. And then when I went into, I was brought on to relaunch a cosmetics company. And I was as the CEO of that. So I was doing turnaround of a company. Mm-hmm. And I was working around the clock. I loved what I was doing, but my bandwidth emotionally, just physically was just at zero. And it took me so long to realize that. And then the relationship I was in, it was problematic because I didn't, where most people have like a little bit more bandwidth to deal with whatever. I only had like 5% left. So my last nerve was frayed.
You were on your last nerve. Yes.
My last nerve was like down to the little bitty, and that wasn't fair. That wasn't fair to me. That wasn't fair to, and I realized that is a reality. And so I set about changing my life from there and changing how, and realizing that is important, that you can't give your all to your work. And, and you have to, even if you're passionate about it, you still have to have a bit of yourself to yourself. And, and even for that venture, that wasn't my company. I was brought in, even though I was running it, I was brought in. And so that was where I learned. And ultimately the parent company wound up going in a different direction. I wasn't able to finish out the plans that I had set. And I learned that you should always have something for yourself. Yeah. That is yours, that you control. It can be small. It can be, it can be not, self-financed and on the slow road forward.
I
you should
love
always
what you're
have
saying.
Something for yourself.
And we need to repeat this because this is a big thing. You're an entrepreneur as well. You're a corporate woman, but you're also an entrepreneur. You're a marketer like me. I resonate so much to your experience because this is often what corporate America And if you're an entrepreneur, corporate America and entrepreneurship could have you feeling like, right? You could be doing fulfilling, amazing work and still feel like, I'm really tired, or this is not it. And it's perfect, right? It's perfectly everything. How do you answer that call to yourself? What were some of the things you did because you could quiet that voice because you're like, everything's fine. How do you not have the everything's fine moment?
I think when you see things not be fine, we think, oh, okay, I have this, steady job or everything, we're at cruising altitude. No, in corporate America, I've seen enough go wrong that is out of left things you wouldn't believe. And so I've seen enough go wrong where I know that nothing is certain other than you. Mm-hmm. And so the way I've come to look at it is that you have to always have your thing that you control and that you're building for yourself, whether you're building a real estate portfolio while you're working your corporate job. Right. Just think of that job as an investor, and that should be your investment capital into something, not just your career thinking, oh, when I get my next promotion, when I get my next rate, whatever. No, that should be from day one. And as much as you can do it, you're an investor. So for me, I decided that books would be my intellectual property portfolio that I was going to start building. Yeah. And so that was what I did. And I wrote a few nonfiction books first. I self-published those. I just put them out in between jobs or projects. I wrote a book on social media strategy. I wrote a book on resilience.
Okay, we're going to put all the books in the show notes because we need to read them.
Okay. they were, that was the important lessons of the time that I thought, okay, these are the things that I've learned that I think people need to know. So one was social media strategy and brand development, how to build your brand in social media. And that was in 2012.
How much would you say things have changed? A lot. You know what? The principles are forever, though.
Principles are forever. And those, when I went back to that book, I was like, this is absolutely irrelevant. It wasn't specific techniques. It was about principles, like foundational principles. And I'm like, and people have since gone in all these directions and come right back to that. I was like, exactly. So, so that was a good experience for me. That was my first real, foray with publishing. And then
were you a writer before? Like you knew, law school, you're a reader. We know you're a reader if you're in law school, but had you ever thought you could be a writer?
I thought I maybe could. And for graduation from Harvard Law, you have to write a thesis or in a research paper. Mm-hmm. And I negotiated being able to write a novel instead of a thesis.
Okay.
Which made me feel like I was going insane. I approached it the completely wrong way and wound up having to go back to my thesis advisor and try to negotiate something different. So we worked out, I would do a screenplay, that was my thesis for graduation. I wrote a screenplay. So that was my first time writing something. But the novel thing imploded. That did not work. So it was many, many years later before I actually was able to structure and complete a novel. Yeah. But I did try.
You did try. Yeah.
I tried it, but that was not it. But
so let's talk about the business side. This is Black on Shelf. Your book is now available. We have one coming up, which
yes.
Black girls don't have to be magic. That's what
Black girls must be magic.
Must be magic, right? Because we're following the same system, and it's really about you don't have to be.
There's more than one meaning.
Yeah. I love it. Yes. Yeah. So that's coming up as well, and you have this one. Talk to us about the process of you as a new author. Really, aside from the marketing books, this now being fiction. What was your process like? I think one thing we could share with the Black on Shelf family is sort of the business behind books, because that's different. I think it's never been more accessible than before, but there's still some things to know. So what has been some of the eye-opening pieces about the industry that maybe folks should know about if they're interested in being an author? Because you self-publish and now you're not.
Right, exactly. Well, I initially self-published because when I went to approach the traditional system and the gatekeeper system and the way that people don't know, the way traditional publishing works, typically, historically, you approach an agent. the agent, if they decide to take on your manuscript and represent it, they're kind of become a sales force to place your manuscript with a publishing house, which will then take on the work of making it into a product and distributing it to all the places where books are sold, and marketing to some extent, publicity, and all of those things to, make a hopefully successful product out of it. But the first step is approaching agents. So when I had my completed manuscript, I approached agents who had represented Black authors or stories that were similar, who said they were looking for contemporary fiction. And I think the other thing to recognize is that publishing has been very historically white, a very white space for a very long time. There's been several different surveys, 95% white.
Whoa.
Yes.
Oh
and so, but an open-minded and inclusive space intending to be, but it doesn't, for many, many reasons, it winds up being this way. And so when you're presenting an underrepresented story, and especially as a Black protagonist, a Black story, there's these conventions that, people are trying to match because people are trying to guess what's going to be successful in the market. So then the best way to guess is to look back. Well, this was successful. Right. So I want something like Such a Fun Age, or I want something like whatever. And very little margin exists for something different or to take risks. And so when I approached with this manuscript with centering this Black female protagonist, it was my first novel. It was my first time with fiction. So I thought maybe I'd get feedback like, this is really bad writing, or this story doesn't make any sense, or it's too wordy, or what. But it was that they felt like they didn't like the protagonist, or they couldn't connect to the story. Tabitha has a white grandmother. They said, well, we really love her grandmother, but we don't love her. And we don't like her. I was like, well, since when?
So these are the same social stuff that happened then.
Yes. So like, well, since when, does a protagonist have to be likable, number one? And then what do you mean you can't connect? It sounds like you're projecting, and you're projecting on behalf of who you think the audience is or not. And I just didn't believe that. I didn't want that to be the last word. And so I thought differently of readers, of the market. I just thought the market's ready for something more progressive. And it was important to put this in front of people and to create this space. So I decided to self-publish and move forward anyway to give readers the last word. And it wound up attracting a community unto itself. And when you say nothing's wasted, I did use my marketing, experience from all the way through. How to build community, how to overserve. From the beginning, my obsession is, I guess, as a marketer, I'm obsessed with the end customer. What is their experience like? Are they enjoying this? Are they getting their money's worth? What's happening? So as a writer, I also think about that. What's happening now? What are they feeling? Where is this going? Is this keeping the attention? Is this, and so I really worked all of that in obsessively. I just wanted it to be such a good experience. And I thought about the book not as a read, but as an experience that happens through reading. And then when I went to the design, there's a lot of pieces that come into making a product out of your writing. So there's the packaging component, which is the cover, cover design. There's the layout of the interior. How is your text laid out? And then somebody has to do the manufacturing. Thankfully, in the indie pub or self-publishing space, there's a lot of just one-stop places that you can go, and they will manufacture your book and distribute it. And then you get a royalty paid to you, and you don't have to hold inventory. You don't have to pay for it to build inventory. That's very important. So the startup costs have become very low for publishing, for in the indie pub and self-pub space. The other thing is that self-publishing, there's like this connotation to it, and it's this sort of it has this, well, it's self-published, which means as lower quality. Implication is that it's lower quality or whatnot. And I really want to change that perception. And I think, there is a gamble. I mean, it's a mix of things because there's no barrier to entry.
Right.
But if people do treat it like a business and do professionalize their work. I worked with an editor.
Get an editor, right.
Yeah, I worked with an editor for my manuscript. I worked with a very professional designer for my book cover. I did all the things. All the
you
things.
Took it seriously, yeah.
I took it very seriously. And I think, people do that. They should be accorded the respect. And I think there's this sort of dismissal in a conditioned dismissal when you say self-published, but it wasn't that,
Yeah.
It's independent publisher, indie pub. Just, it's a Rock Nation or it's a, Young Money. It's a, it's an independent, but you're treating it like a company and a startup.
Yeah.
So that was, what I leveraged everything that I knew. And over time, one of the things that happened was that I wound up talking to a lot of book clubs. And during 2020, it not only were we, in quarantined and stuck at home, but also George Floyd happened and this question of race came up and that it became a very important conversation that people did not know how to have, but knew, this is necessary on a number of levels. And so my book was there to help facilitate some of those conversations. And I made myself available also to help facilitate those conversations. So I said, any book club who's reading my book, I will join virtually as long as my schedule permits, which translated to over 60 book club meetings.
That's amazing.
Yes, across 5 continents. And it was an incredible experience. But out of one of those meetings, I was introduced to my agent. And then my agent wound up securing a 4-book deal with Harper Perennial, which is HarperCollins.
Oh my gosh.
So that's how this came about. And there is a difference in the...
You always have these uncanny experiences, right?
Yeah.
You're in the room with the right person. So also network is another thing.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And just continuing, you don't have to be perfect in how there were days, I tried to be consistent in social media, but there were days where I wasn't. I would be dragging myself to whatever it was. I wasn't on or perfect every day in every scenario, but I showed up, as much as I could. I suited up, I showed up, and bit by bit by bit, day by day, it adds up and you get to the finish line of where you're trying to go. So with this, that was definitely what happened. And I wound up, so in the process of working with a traditional publisher now, it came around a completely different way. So again, that's that relationship with the experience has shifted over time.
You're like, I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah,
and then you got what you would have wanted anyway.
In a much better way. So the perfect scenario came about. And we had an opportunity to work with an editor and rewrite the books to perfect the experience that was I'm crafting for the reader, which was
had you already had the second book? You had all 3 of them already planned out at that time too?
I had the books all planned out. The first and second were written, and the third was heavily outlined. So,
do we know the name of the 3rd book in the trilogy?
Not yet. We don't.
Oh
I don't know how we're gonna top Black Girls Must Be Magic. I was like, no, maybe we should have kept that for the 3rd.
But they're both true. They're both super social truths. Black girls must die exhausted. We know that. And it's like similar to Black Girls Must Be Magic. It's like they're very similar concepts, right? They're coming against something very similar, but they're totally different. They're different experiences, but they're in the same landscape for sure. Being magic means sometimes means you're going to be exhausted in the process in order to show up looking like magic. Like as a marketer myself, one of the personality types I love to build on is the magician, right? So we know the personality wheel. I love to work with the magician because the way I define the magician in brands that I build is really this human. As I'm infusing a brand, I'm like, this is the human that practices and has a lot of adversity behind the scenes.
Right.
But in person, you just see them juggling all the balls without it dropping. The balls can drop. They've dropped a lot of times behind the scene, but in that moment in the spotlight, it's going to be perfect. It's going to look seamless. It's going to look amazing. And so I
Right.
have a lot of respect for the magician personality. And I try to infuse that into any brand where it fits, where I'm building it. And
Yes.
I'm thinking about that consumer group who is trying to be the best, and how the process they do that is the behind the scenes work that people don't see. So
Right.
I'm curious if the magician takes on similar personalities. I know the Black woman really certainly is the magician when it comes to
Yes.
in terms of personality style.
Right?
Yes,
Exactly.
we
Right.
are.
Having it all together. So that was really kind of fun in this series, in this trilogy, to show the unraveling.
Love
To
it.
push. And I mean, I had to throw a lot at these characters to get them to
they're
unravel.
resilient, right? They're
Oh my
resilient.
gosh. I was just like, wow, I'm so sorry. But I had to do so much to
Yeah.
get, but I'm like, we have to get to this point. So as an author,
Wow.
I'm like, wow, you really have to throw a lot of fireballs at these characters to get them to unravel. But I thought that unraveling was so important to get to that humanity, and
Yeah.
to get past that facade and that veneer of perfection and all of those things that we're conditioned to believe that we need to deliver.
And you don't always get to that intimate experience with that person to see that vulnerability, right? That's
Right.
reserved to people close.
Right, exactly.
That type of vulnerability is reserved for people that is close to that person, because usually you're never going to see that, right? The magician is all about, I have the clothes on, I have the everything. You don't know who I am really all the time behind all of it. You don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Something else I want to ask is, in terms of these milestones, you self-publish, you get signed on to an agent. How does that process change your distribution or change your awareness? Talk to me about kind of how the support level shifted a bit with that extra support.
So the distribution, well, first of all, with sales and distribution, it's very, very different. I think, both sales and distribution are extremely limited when it comes to the indie pub space and or self-publishing. You don't have a sales team unless you pay for that. You don't have wide distribution. You may not be in bookstores. You can do something where it happens, but there's a competition for shelf space. So you don't have someone advocating for you at that level in the same way, and you don't have as much reach and distribution. Yeah. Now with
it's direct to consumer, right? You can be on your own website and a few other specialty bookstores or sites, or you can be in a large retailer. That's where you're vying for shelf space. Right. And that's when the time is ticking. You're only here as long as this is doing great. If it doesn't, we're going to replace you. So it's totally this is why I'm she has to come on Black on Shelf. It relates to books too. It's so similar.
Oh, it's so, yes. And I was in cosmetics. I mean, we took that brand. It was a brick and mortar brand, and took it direct to consumer and did a hybrid, and ultimately relaunched it on QVC as part of that experience. So, finding a different model, a hybrid model that does a little bit of both. But for books, it's still very much traditional space dominated in a lot of ways. And one of the big differences, this month, Black Girls Must Die Exhausted is Target's club pick for October. That's a big deal. There's a huge footprint that the Target stores have. Oh, yeah. And, there's a lot of visibility for the book. There's a lot of sell through there. And so that would not and could not have happened in I don't believe so in the indie pub space, just because it's just, there's a different level of support. There's a different level of stock availability. There's a different, when you get to that level, you need to be able to stock, restock, support all of those things. Yeah. And you need infrastructure. Keep it relevant. Yeah. You need infrastructure to do that. So that's a big difference. Once you're upstreaming and you're, going to the traditional channels, that's different. But I think there's a lot that's available still to do in the indie pub space, and I think that there's a good case to be made of starting there, building your audience there, and then looking to scale up, in the traditional space. So
would that be your advice even to interested authors? Would you say, hey, start it off, write the book?
Yeah, I would say that.
Plan to self-publish, and along the way, as you refine that process, get it, perhaps an agent comes your way, or you can look for one, or, it may happen serendipitously as well. But would you say that is something you recommend, just so that folks don't make the excuse of, well, I probably can't get signed onto an agent. So it's like, well, write the book first. Give them something, right? Give them
write
something.
The book. Yeah, I would say write the book first and think, how are you going to build your audience and your platform?
Yeah.
And, it's a little bit, a little bit complicated as it pertains to self-published books or indie pub books, and how that affects your trajectory with traditional publishers. It's unusual for a traditional publisher to pick up a previously published series, for example, but it happens. So I wouldn't just say blanketly, okay, just everybody just self-publish and whatever, and not think about the balance of, how one thing will affect the other, and without having a plan and without treating it as if it's a business. Like, I think you should have a business plan for the book. So if you're going to self-publish, know what your plan is and treat it like a business. And if you're gonna, and to know why what your goals are and how you're going to use this to your advantage. And if you're going to be with a traditional publisher, really understand what that process is like, because it's definitely a different process, and it definitely has different metrics, and it definitely has different requirements of you as an author. And if you're not prepared as a marketer and a person that can build and serve an audience, then that is you're going to be hampered, and you're not going to be ready to be in the traditional space, and you're not going to make most of it.
And I'm glad you said that, because again, we know, from being in CPG, that's the same for a consumer product. So we're talking about this in the context of a book, but that's the same advice for a CPG product. You want to be in the big leagues. There's a certain level of investment and activity that you have to have. It's not just about getting on that shelf. It's about, how do I drive demand there? Yeah, you can go broke. So this is exactly what Jayne is telling us. Like, there's still activity, there's still demand driving activity, there's still promotions that have to happen. In fact, more, because now you're there.
Right. And you have to sell through, and there's things called returns. Yeah. And if you sell, you do the initial, buy, and it doesn't sell through, and then you return, you get returns, you can wind up making negative profit or negative revenue. So that's something that to keep in mind with, a physical product and distribution in that way. And that's one of the great things about the indie pub space, is that you can insulate yourself from that. And so you have a real chance to start your business and really, build things with a much lower level of risk. And then at a traditional publishing space, there is a lot of exposure, but the publisher takes that on. But then again, you're the one that, you don't want to be that risk factor. So you want to be a sure bet, and you want to put yourself in that position. And that means you need to be an effective driver of sales yourself. And you need to know how to do that. And you need to know how the business works and how sell-through happens, and all of those things. So it's still not packaged goods business, but it's a physical product business.
A physical product.
And it's a business. It is
a business. Yeah. Is it on Audible as yet, or are there plans?
Yes. Okay. There's an Audible version. It's very good. I'm excited about that. Yeah. Because that was definitely one of the product offshoots that I was not able to do on my own as of the time that's happened.
But you didn't read it yourself, did you?
Oh no.
Okay,
no,
you had
there's a voice actress who read that. Yeah. I wish I could.
Sometimes authors do it. Yeah.
There's too many voices. If it was a memoir or something, I feel like I would be better suited to read it. But with this, like, fiction, and there's a lot of different characters and voices, and that's not my jam. So I'm glad that this woman, who is an incredible voice actress, who's passionate and just did an amazing job, I'm glad that she did that. And it wasn't me.
Right. So it's on Audible. Tell us all of the other places that we may know where the book is available. We would love to support.
It's probably everywhere that books are sold.
Wherever books are sold.
It's everywhere books are sold. Thankfully, we are there. You can find it in the airport. Yes. You can find it at Target. You can find it in your indie bookstore. You can find it in your library. It is everywhere
wide
it should
distribution,
be.
people.
And if you don't see it, you can request it to be ordered for you if you go into a indie bookstore. But it's at all the major booksellers, libraries, other stores, and it's the current Target Club pick, so it's featured in Target now. And
one of our favorite places to go to get it.
Oh my gosh, right? I'm like, where everything is sold, where you get everything else. So I just love that, it's convenient for people who regularly buy books and people who don't. And that was one of the things for me. I wanted to write a book that even people who had stepped away from reading or who aren't regular readers could get an experience out of this that they would enjoy and maybe, look for more books to read. So I wanted to make more readers into something that was, it wasn't so much a book in as much as it was an experience to be had. So,
all right. So for those that haven't read yet, you're not too late, but get on board because February, the second book of the trilogy is coming, as you just heard.
Ready.
So you have some time to catch up. And if you're looking for a book to give to a friend who might have said these exact words or had these feelings, this is another good book to help them as they try to liberate themselves and find peace of mind or find that reassurance that there is a way to thrive without being exhausted.
That's right.
I'm thinking about a friend here who I know this is where she's at, but also, she has a lot to offer the world with writing. So this episode is for you, Lakia. I hope to see your book on shelf one day. And Jayne has paved that way for more of us. That's the other thing, right, about this space. The more Black authors that are successful, it means more Black authors that they can receive, right? That they can receive, because now they have something to say, oh, this did well. Let's give this a try. This does meet the audience. This is content you all want. So I love that, that this book really, and the series, the trilogy, the fact that it's a trilogy, this investment in the story and the journey of us really is here for everyone. I think it paves the way.
Yes, it's hopefully it's making space. That's what I wanted to do. It was to make space.
So would you say that's part of your next frontier? We know the second book is coming, a third will come. What are some of the other ways you're paving the way for you and these stories? What's the next frontier?
I think that just continuing to tell stories and continuing to amplify, the people and stories and journeys that are under celebrated and less seen. And that is just something I'm passionate about. I do it, as an author, I do it behind the scenes in publishing. I plan to continue to put these stories out, but also what I would like to do, and I haven't had time to do this, but also try to find more books in the indie pub space to amplify and to help. Because I think it's hard to know, what to do with your time and what to read. And I realize that. So I really want to, I spent a lot of time now highlighting, Black and other underrepresented voices in publishing, but more so lately from the traditionally published space. So I would like to spend more time, amplifying out of the indie pub space and to really help.
Tell us what to read.
To really help, because there's some cool, there's really cool stuff there. People are trying new things. There's a book called Torn, and it's Emporia Yazdani. It's like it mixes like metaphysics and adventure, and it's like magical realism. And it's super cool. And so it's indie pubbed, and that's just, I'm like, I hope I can find more of those books to talk about, because I don't know, how easy it is to look through and find. So, I definitely want to amplify other
that would be great.
Indie-pubbed authors.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think it's hard to pinpoint the ones that are more underserved and below the ground unless you're already in that space. You don't even have access. Those names never bubble up.
Right.
We read what's on the lists.
Right, exactly.
To read. So
and it's always
creating your own list is the way.
It's always traditionally published books. And I think just even educating readers in that space, and especially as a community and as a readers who are looking for more Black stories. A lot of the times when you see the reading list and you're getting recommendations, those are all traditionally pub books. And that's just something to be aware of. If all the books you're reading are only traditionally pub books, then that's not creating that's helping to continue to, make sure that Black books get published, but it's not necessarily creating new space.
No.
So I just want to start to encourage people to have a little bit of space in their reading time for indie pub books to be able to support authors making spaces.
So how much time does the author have the right to read books?
Oh my gosh, not that much, but you'd be surprised. It's a good reading is an escape for me. So sometimes when I need to step away from, something, whether it's strategy or work or which work is also reading too, a lot of times, I'll read, I read for information, for inspiration, for pleasure. So that's a time and space that I am able to make.
Love that. So you are an author with the book on shelf. What does that mean to be a Black author talking about these issues on shelf?
I think it's really important. And it's not everyone's job, just because you're a Black author and Black authors are underrepresented. It's not your job to, do anything other than to promote your book and yourself ultimately. But for me, it's because of the journey that I took and what I've seen, had the fortune or, whatever, however you look at it, to see and experience. I just know that there's more for me to say about this. And I want what I'm doing it's more meaningful for me to know that what I'm doing means something for people coming behind, and that, that it's creating a bigger and wider space and solving an issue that really needs to be solved, that improves representation and makes more readers and makes a stronger publishing industry. And I really love books. I love this space. I think it's so important. I think, reading is important. Books are important. So, and our stories are so important.
Our stories are important. So we are here to support, love the concept behind all of these. Also love your story. It's so genuine. I see so much pieces of Jayne, the real Jayne in there, right?
Yes.
Told through these stories and others, right? So that's definitely one of the benefits of the way you've written this book. How can we all follow?
I am on Instagram, JayneAllen Writes, Jayne Allen Writes, and I'm at JayneAllen.com. You can sign up for my newsletter, which I send out very sporadically, not often, so I do not spam people. I only send out things that are very, very important. And
like the indie book list one day.
I know. I can't wait to send out. Yes, we made the bestseller list. I definitely feel like it's a that we did this, because it has been an effort of community. But those are the two places to connect with me, where I am most frequently. I'm on Twitter as Jayne Allen said, but I don't really regularly tweet. So I'm just keeping it real. Just keep it real. Yeah.
Yes. Instagram is where you can find Jayne. Also, gift the book and get one for yourself. Get one for a friend that might be, get it for your ambitious friend that might be exhausted but needs to just be reminded, and get it for yourself. It's also an Audible if you are a person that doesn't have the time to hold the book. Yes. You want to listen to it, that's there for you too. But it's a beautiful book, so buy it and you will at least have it in your home. It is an iconic book to have. So put that on your bookshelf and buy it for the beauty. Touch the pages, even if you listen to it on Audible. Thank you so much for coming, Jayne. Love your story, love your background. We're going to support this. I am so excited about the topics you're covering, how real your book is bringing up topics that we don't get to talk about all the time, and absolutely bringing that representation of us. Thank you for writing the book, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Thank you.